June 17, 1775. The hills outside Boston burned with gunfire, smoke rising into the summer sky. The British Army, disciplined, experienced, feared, marched in perfect formation. Across the field, colonial militiamen, farmers, carpenters, blacksmiths stood nervously behind crude earthworks, their hands trembling on muskets. The clash that followed would become one of the bloodiest and most famous battles of the American Revolution. This is the Battle of Bunker Hill. To understand Bunker Hill, we need to step back to the spring of 1775. Tensions between the American colonies and Britain were already reaching a breaking point. Just 2 months earlier, in April, shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, the shot heard round the world. The war for independence had begun, but it was still new, fragile, uncertain. Boston was under siege. Thousands of colonial militia surrounded the city, keeping the British troops trapped inside. The British, led by General Thomas Gage, controlled Boston with about 6,000 soldiers. But outside the city, some 15,000 colonial militiamen gathered, eager but untrained. Both sides knew the standoff could not last. Boston itself was vulnerable. It sat on a peninsula, connected to the mainland by a narrow strip of land. Surrounding it were hills, high ground that controlled the approaches to the city. Whoever held the high ground could control Boston Harbor and the routes in and out of the city. The British planned to take these heights, but the colonists, under leaders like Colonel William Prescott and Israel Putnam, made their move first. On the night of June 16th, 1775, more than 1,000 colonial soldiers quietly marched to the Charlestown Peninsula. They carried shovels, picks, and muskets. Their task, build fortifications on Bunker Hill, but they stopped instead at a smaller rise closer to Boston, known as Breed's Hill. Through the night, the colonists worked furiously. By dawn, they had constructed a crude earthen fort on Breed's Hill. British ships in the harbor spotted the movement, and soon cannons roared, bombarding the hill. But the colonists held their ground. For the first time, the colonial militia had seized the initiative. Now the British had no choice. If they allowed these fortifications to stand, their control of Boston would collapse. General William Howe, one of Britain's most capable officers, prepared to attack. The British believed their disciplined troops could sweep aside the ragtag militia with ease. Nearly 2,400 British soldiers, infantry in bright red coats, supported by naval firepower, began assembling for the assault. The colonists watched as wave after wave of soldiers crossed the river. From behind their earthen walls, Colonel Prescott gave his famous order: "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." Ammunition was scarce and every shot had to count. The British advanced in perfect lines, drums beating, bayonets gleaming. The colonists held their fire. The British drew closer, 100 yards, 50 yards, 30 yards. Then suddenly the hillside erupted in musket fire. The front ranks of British soldiers crumpled under the deadly volley. The survivors fell back in confusion. Against all expectations, the untrained colonial militia had repelled the first assault. Undeterred, General Howe ordered a second assault. Again, the red lines marched forward. Again, the colonists waited, then unleashed devastating musket fire. Once more, the British staggered, retreating down the hill. By now, Charlestown was burning. British artillery set the town aflame, black smoke filling the sky. Still, the militia stood firm. Twice, the mightiest army in the world had been driven back by farmers and shopkeepers. But the colonists faced a grim reality. Ammunition was nearly gone. They had fought bravely, but their powder and shot were running out. When Howe ordered a third assault, the British troops advanced with bayonets fixed. This time, the colonial volleys were weak, scattered. As the British closed in, the defenders had little left to fight with but rocks, fists, and bayonets. The redcoats surged over the walls and the colonists were forced to retreat. The British had captured the ground, but at a terrible price. Out of 2,400 soldiers, more than 1,000 were killed or wounded. The colonists, though defeated, had inflicted staggering losses. The British commanders had expected an easy victory. Instead, they faced one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. For the colonists, it was a bitter retreat, but also a revelation. They had stood against the strongest army in the world, and twice they had driven it back. Bunker Hill proved that the revolutionaries could fight and fight well. Though technically a British victory, it strengthened the resolve of the American cause. News of the battle spread quickly, inspiring thousands more to join the Continental Army. General George Washington, upon taking command shortly afterward, praised the courage of the militia. For the British, the battle was sobering. They had won the ground, but at a cost that shook their confidence. If every hill, every town, every skirmish would cost them this dearly, how long could they hold the colonies? The Battle of Bunker Hill was not the largest battle of the Revolutionary War. It did not decide the outcome of the conflict, but in those hours on a June day in 1775, something greater happened. The Battle of Bunker Hill was not, by the cold language of military strategy, a decisive victory. The British had taken the ground, the colonists had been forced to retreat, and the cannons of the Royal Navy still commanded the harbor. But beneath the smoke and blood, something larger had shifted, a turning of spirit, a revelation of possibility. For the ragged militia, it proved that this war would not be won quickly, that it would be long, grueling, bloody, and unimaginably costly. Yet it also proved that freedom, however distant, was not impossible. For the first time, ordinary men had stood face to face with the greatest army in the world, and though driven back, had broken its pride and shaken its confidence. And so Bunker Hill became more than a patch of scorched earth. It became a symbol etched into memory, a symbol of defiance against tyranny, a symbol of sacrifice given freely in the name of liberty, a symbol of courage that outlived the men who fell upon that hill. In its soil were sown the seeds of a new nation, a nation that would rise not because it never lost, but because it refused to surrender its cause. In that smoke-filled summer dawn, amid the cries of the wounded and the thunder of cannon, the world began to see not just colonies in rebellion, but a people at the birth of independence. A people discovered their strength, a cause found its courage, and the world began to understand that the fight for American independence would not be easily crushed. This was the Battle of Bunker Hill,